All right, welcome all. Welcome, friends of Earth, Ecocide, workers, volunteers all around the world. Welcome to the live event that the issue today is going to be Ecocide law updates from the world and Turkey. When I look at the audience that you cannot see at the moment, I see vloggers, I see journalists, I see climate defenders, let's say, nature defenders are all here. The activists are all here. And I'd like to introduce our dear, lovely Jojo Mehta, as you say. And she's been here only for a day, and we grabbed her to give us this wonderful, make this wonderful event. So today, first I'm going to introduce Jojo, as you know of. It's going to be information for the ones who do not know of. And then we're going to pass on to Turkey, where we have been working on the Ecocide law for about 2 years' time. And we started to reap our efforts. We started to make visible progress in
very
public.
Exciting. Yeah. It's very exciting.
Yeah. Well, it's up to you to decide. Right. For Jojo, as you know, she's the co-founder of Stop Ecocide in 2017, alongside barrister and legal pioneer, the late Polly Higgins, to support the establishment of ecocide as a crime at the International Criminal Court. As co-founder, Ecocide director, and key spokesperson of Stop Ecocide International, Jojo has overseen the remarkable growth of the movement while coordinating between legal developments, diplomatic traction, and public narrative. She is chair of the charitable Stop Ecocide Foundation and convener of the independent expert panel for the legal definition of ecocide, chaired by Philip Sands and Joe Fall. And the core work to make ecocide as an international crime at the International Criminal Court is supported and progressed by a large network of over 45 teams that were included and associate groups globally. There are over 50,000 endorsing signatories across civil society and faith groups, and a growing number of endorsing businesses and organizations.
Thank you so much. And welcome everybody. And thanks so much for welcoming me here as well. This is my first time in Turkey, my first time in Istanbul. It's amazing. So yeah, firstly, I just want to say that everyone in this room and everyone watching this is basically part of what we believe is one of the most exciting movements on the planet right now.
Exactly.
And why is that? Well, we're all aware of the level of global ecological and climate crisis that we're in. We're also painfully aware of how slow action seems to be at a government level, and also in terms of changes in the approach of industry and the corporate world towards practices that have led us to this point. And I've actually stopped saying we are on the brink of ecological collapse. We are actually in the process of ecological collapse. We have already crossed 6 of 9 planetary boundaries that define what makes Earth habitable for humans in a comfortable way. So we have in place around the world many environmental laws. We also have a growing number of multilateral environmental agreements. But what we are not finding is that these laws are actually adequate to prevent the severe harms to nature that we're seeing, with things like a decline of 70% of wildlife in the last 50 years and so on. So what we're seeing is a lack of judicial enforceability. And companies continue to pollute as usual, continue their practices as usual, knowing that perhaps they may face fines, but costing that in to their balance sheets. What we believe here is that criminal law can make a huge difference. because criminal law in our dominant, which is Western way of thinking that has come to dominate the economic world of the whole world, we use criminal law to draw moral lines. If you break a regulation, there is no real moral stigma attached to this. But when you introduce a crime, then you have a different level of deterrence, of prevention, and of accountability. Now, at the moment, if you are campaigning for human rights, at least you understand that mass murder, torture, forced disappearance, all of these kinds of things are deeply criminal, wrong, bad. They are classified as international crimes. There is no equivalent in the environmental sphere. And what this means is that despite all of the provision that is in place, and despite agreements like the Paris Agreement, like the Coming Montreal Biodiversity Framework, these are not taken seriously enough. So we have a deep cultural issue where we don't take destruction of nature seriously enough. So putting in place a crime, a serious crime at the international level, as well as indeed at national level, can create this foundation that supports the existing environmental laws and regulations. And one can imagine that a board of directors might approach its environmental obligations in a very different way, knowing that if it fails to fulfill them and it threatens ecocide or severe, widespread or long-term harm to nature as a result, that its members could be in criminal law territory. And there is a double deterrence level when we look at ecocide law compared to, for example, other serious crimes. Let's say if you are a, God forbid, genocidal maniac, you are probably not worried about your public image. If you are a corporation, this matters to you very deeply. And what that means is that if you are a C-suite executive, an important person of responsibility within a corporation, and you have the potential of being criminally responsible for damage caused by your corporation, then you are not just looking at a threat to your own reputation and potentially your own freedom, you are also looking at a threat to the reputation of your company and, of course, to the value of your company. And so there is a level of effectiveness in deterrence by creating this law that is not paralleled by other means. And of course, what we are seeing now is this rising frustration around the world with how slowly governments are responding to the situation that we face. And we're seeing a growing momentum behind the possibility of recognizing ecocide in criminal law. And I will come to the details of that progress soon. But I would like to just begin by giving a little bit of background in terms of what has brought this potential solution to the visibility that it is now beginning to enjoy. When the Rome Statute, which is the governing document of the International Criminal Court, was being drafted in the 1990s, there was some discussion around putting in a clause that would cover severe harm to the environment. It never made it into the final treaty. And this fact was discovered by my dear late colleague and friend, Polly Higgins, many years ago. She is sadly no longer with us. She died of cancer in 2019. But she spent the last 10 years of her life advocating for a crime of ecocide, not least because she saw it as the missing crime that should have been there. And tragically, but perhaps in a very human way, when Polly passed away, many people got in touch and said, we cannot allow this work to die with her. How can we help? And so what emerged was a gradual joining together of campaigners, politicians, lawyers, interest groups, academics around the world that has just grown and grown since then. The issue was brought back onto the diplomatic table by a small Pacific Ocean country called Vanuatu. The Pacific Island countries, as you may well know, are suffering at the sharp end of the effects of climate change. So they have every incentive to look at a law of this kind. And Vanuatu, in particular, has an amazing initiative in terms of their action at the diplomatic level. We say in English, they punch above their weight. They're very effective in the diplomatic sphere, and we have been working closely with them as they approach legal avenues to address climate change and the ecological breakdown. And they reintroduced this issue onto the diplomatic table in 2019 at the Assembly of States Parties to the International Criminal Court. They called on all member states to consider adding ecocide as a fifth crime to the Rome Statute, alongside war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression, more recently added. So that was a really major milestone, bringing it back into the international conversation. Perhaps the biggest milestone of all was the launch of a definition of ecocide in 2021. Now, there had been working definitions of the crime over the years. Since the term was coined in 1970, there had been several sort of iterations of legal attempts to legally define ecocide, but they had usually been from one lawyer or a small group of lawyers. And the difference, of course, is that if you want governments to get behind something, you need to have a certain breadth of credibility. And this opportunity arose in 2020 when some Swedish parliamentarians approached our charitable foundation and said, could you commission a text, a collaborative consensus legal text that would have the weight and credibility that we could take to our government and say, would you propose this at the international level? And on the basis of that, we were able to convene a panel of 12 international lawyers from different parts of the world with different specialities, from humanitarian law to international criminal law to human rights law, environment law, and climate law, and also different ideologies. So from quite conventional, we had a member of the International Law Commission, and we had a former ICC judge, to the more activist end, the people's lawyers, fighting for indigenous and local communities. And so the definition that emerged from that process was truly a consensus definition, and one that gained instant traction in the media and also at the political level. And since 2021, this conversation has really started to run very fast in terms of different countries addressing it and talking about it, and different bodies coming into support of it. Now, I hope you will take one of these with you when you leave. Got some cards here with the definition on it if you haven't seen it. But the definition is really quite simple. Ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there's a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. Now, what we believe has landed so well about that definition in particular is that what it doesn't do is list particular things that would be defined as ecocide or that you're not allowed to do. And this is very important, because most of environmental regulation is highly specific. It's, pages and pages of this particular toxin can only be used in this circumstance up to a certain amount, those kinds of things, which means that what expensive lawyers spend a lot of time doing is working out how to get around those exact requirements. What this definition does instead is it focuses on the consequences, and it says whatever you do, effectively is the implication, whatever you do, it must not create this level of harm. And that is very important, because it doesn't point the finger at particular companies or particular sectors, which politically speaking is very useful, but it also means that people can't say, oh, well, I'm not doing that exact thing, so it's not me. They actually have to concretely look at what they are doing on the ground and see whether it is in danger of crossing this kind of line. So it acts more as a kind of a guardrail or a safety rail that remains valid over time. Because we don't know if next year somebody is going to dream up some awful ecocidal practice that we haven't yet thought of. And so to have a definition like this, which is dynamic and remains relevant, is very important. Another aspect of it is that those acts have to be unlawful or wanton. So they have to be already illegal in some way. Now, that's actually quite important. Firstly, we have discovered over the years that many of the worst harms are already illegal. They're already breaking regulation or in breach of rights frameworks. So there's, for example, a very large percentage of massive deforestation is already against regulatory provision. But also the wanton aspect, or willful is another way to perhaps encapsulate that, is if the harm is disproportionately severe, even if it's permitted, then that also potentially can be described as ecocide. And the intention of this is not to create a silver bullet for every possible environmental harm. What it is aimed to do is to name the worst harms as serious crimes, to create that foundational piece. And this has now, this is really beginning to resonate at government level in many different places. So as a brief update as to where this conversation is now happening, you may have heard that the European Parliament proposed including something very close to this definition, actually, within the European Environmental Crimes Directive. And that is currently being discussed with the EU Commission and with the Council. And we expect a text to emerge probably next month. We don't know exactly whether it will be the text we would perfectly like, but it will be moving in the right direction. There have also been half a dozen countries where ecocide law has been proposed into Parliament in recent months. And we'll hear more about the Turkish situation soon, but there are also been proposals in Brazil, Netherlands, Mexico, Spain, and Italy, all within the last few months. So those will be obviously making their journeys through the parliamentary processes. And then we also have Belgium, which is the most advanced in terms of using a definition of ecocide strongly relates to this one. They've already been through both their government readings, the first and second reading, and they're now simply awaiting parliamentary approval. So they're probably the closest to legislating. France has legislated for what they are calling ecocide, but it's a little bit of a different definition. It's less strong, shall we say. This is very much beyond the stage of this is a good idea. It's actually, this is a legislative direction of travel that is clearly visible in the world. And this is very encouraging. We are also, of course, seeing support from a number of different sectors, shall we say. We have, as Ilksen mentioned earlier, between 45 and 50 different groups around the world in different countries, but we also have interest groups like, for example, farmers for ecocide law, business for ecocide law, youth for ecocide law, which is a massive network already. So all of these different groups that are coming behind it. But big organizations, for example, in the faith world, have also expressed support, the World Council of Churches, for example, and also indigenous leaders, and indeed the beginnings of some significant interest from the business and investment world as well. Who are interested in stabilizing risk going into the future and actually leveling the playing field for doing the right thing. So I think as an introductory thing, I'll leave it there for now, and we can obviously take more questions as we go. And I'm really looking forward to the Turkish update.
Yeah, okay. Well, later on, we're going to have the consecutive translation and we can discuss about our own questions in mind. And let me talk about Turkey at the moment. I would like to start from what we achieved so far. With the citizens' ecocide law proposal, we collected 25,000 wet signatures from all across Turkey. At the desks we set up, we explained what ecocide means, the heavy prices people and nature pay, that nature has rights, and that the existing laws are not enough to protect us or nature. We explained why we need a new understanding and the knowingly support of the public. A new bill that can be part of the international law that will provide a change in our perspective with nature that will make the existing environmental laws work. We are leaving for Ankara on November 28th to present these signatures, which were collected by communicating directly with people and individuals and sharing information with them, to the presidency of the Grand National Assembly of Turkey and the Petitions Commission. That's the main thing. And it has taken a total of 2 years for our work to reach this stage. November is a precious month for us. Every November, we see that we have been able to realize the progress we have put on our calendar. And despite all the negativity around us, we base our motivation into our solidarity and our will to persist. Let me take you back to November 2021. After the return of COP26, activists in Turkey who participated in the event came together and adopted the idea of building a coalition that prioritized climate justice and international relations against the injustices of the costs imposed on us in the climate crisis, as you just mentioned. On December 25th, 2021, the Climate Justice Coalition, consisting of 72 constituents and independent participating individuals, was established in this way. And at its first meeting, it was decided that the issue of ecocide should be studied in detail. Yeah. Can you close the door, please? Thank you so much. Here. All right. At that time, the Sea of Marmara was covered with mucilage from one end to the other over its huge area of 11,000 square kilometers. 30 years of relentlessly increasing marine pollution, which in the past had repeatedly manifested itself in mass fish deaths and discoloration in the sea, had now exposed the entire body of water to a heavy explosion of mucilage. Conversationists, academics, and decision makers took it to the field during these periods while we were explaining in both national and international meetings the Marmara Sea was exposed to the most severe damage as a result of deliberate acts. We organized a 4-day mobilization that we call Caravan in June 2022 to show that Marmara Sea is an ecocide crime scene. We came together with all local organizations and produced joint protest actions. We exposed the facilities that create pollution, who take no precautions and are not limited by any sanctions, just as was Jojo was explaining. By traveling from city to city, I'm interrupting in here. It's so interesting that we're all feeling and experiencing the same thing all around the world, no matter what part of the world you're living in. You're experiencing exactly the same thing, exactly the same worries, exactly as if you're, only the names are changing, but the situations is equally the same and equally catastrophic. Yeah. And by traveling from city to city, from river to river, we both came together as activists and announced that we will show public the ecological destruction and determined to follow this issue. During this process, a legal group was working on the transposition of ecocide into our domestic law. In all areas of nature protection, legal struggle and resistance in Turkey, the fact that ecocide is a crime was already internalized by local people and local civil society organizations. It just had not been named at that time, and it turned into a tangible movement focusing on this issue. It's ours. As a result of the connections we established with the Stop Ecocide team, I should never forget Kim and Patricia. It was them who we first met, and I gradually that's funny. Yeah. As a result of the connections we established with the Stop Ecocide team, I gradually transitioned from being Miss Marmara to being Ecocide Türkiye, and took on the mission of strengthening the connections between my friends in Turkey and the world, and continuing the exchange of information. Right. I said that November is our lead time. Last year, between November 3rd and the 4th, we organized a conference on ecocide for the first time in Turkey with international presentations. Environmental lawyers from Turkey, including Arif Ali Cangı and İsmail Hakkı Atal, the lawyers of Akbelen, İliç, and Akkuyu, Patricia Willock, who presented us how the Belgian Parliament passed the ecocide law, and Rodrigo Liedo, who explained us how the ecocide law proposal was prepared, were there with 70 civil society activists in the conference. We also met with Jojo Mehta, almost the entire Stop Ecocide team, constitutional and law professors İbrahim Kaboğlu and Kutluhan Bozkurt, participants from bar associations, and a member of parliament at that time, Ali Şeker. The issue would then be discussed and worked on in the corridors of parliament. At the end of the conference, activist Oruç Karacık, he must be there, right? Oruç Karacık's suggestion, that was such a kind of synergy that we built up, and everyone was looking at the same direction to find a way out, maybe. And then he came up with the idea that why don't we as citizens submit a law proposal to parliament, which we're not normally allowed, legitimized to do that, but proposal to parliament that should be passed, was quickly accepted, and we started to work on it. So our law proposals are made up of petitions, as it is, just like this. These are the thousands of signatures, but that we make a petition, we make our demand. Up above, we have the Citizens Ecocide Law, which I will explain. In the process of writing Citizens Ecocide Law proposal, we first consulted with academics. As you can see on the Climate Justice Coalition's YouTube account, we held a series of Zoom meetings under the title of Thursday Talks, where hot debates took place. Professor Nesrin Algan, Associate Professor Dr. Barış Erman, and Kutluhan Bozkurt directly contributed to the preparation of our Citizens Ecocide Law proposal by listening to us and learning from us about the situation on the ground. And they guided the content of the proposal in terms of both our constitution and international law. Then, with the writing of dear Arif Ali Cangı and Barış Erman, our draft law was finalized. And then on January 27th, 2023, we announced to the press that we had prepared the Citizen Ecocide Law proposal with an event attended by 130 activists. You know, we're enlarging ourselves from all over Turkey. In order to embrace the public attention, we set up signature desks desks to gather signatures, highlighted and connected the local agenda of each region to the implications of an ecocide law, and continued our work on the streets. And I'm about to finish on the, yeah, that's the saddest part. On the 6th of February 2023, an unprecedented earthquake storm devastated 11 provinces. We needed to halt our work as we rushed to the earthquake zone to provide help. But when we recovered a little, we resumed from where we left off. We regret to say that the number of conservation actions and resistances are increasing every day due to the decision makers giving a pass to the plunder of nature. The public, which has been paying attention to the deaths of innocents in Ukraine, Palestine, and Israel, has not yet realized how to fight back or even defend their own rights when it comes to the destruction of nature, the pollution of water, soil, and air, and the genocide of the species. For example, in the Akbelen resistance, where thousands of trees were cut down, the thermal power plants which were operated unlawfully have today depleted not only their locations, but also the water resources of Bodrum, kilometers away. And the carbon gas emitted from the region is raining down on African countries as acid rain. Another example, after the earthquake, we have seen that deliberate acts in intention and worse damage could indeed have been paired with unimaginable acts, as you were suggesting that the broadness of the nature of the proposal, such as the failure to control cancerous asbestos due to irregularities during the removal of demolished buildings over an area of thousands of kilometers, and the dumping of rubble in agricultural areas. The common point of hundreds of ecological devastations, such as nuclear power plants built on fault lines, widespread pollution in Lake Van, and the ongoing slaughter of trees in the southeast, is the tolerance of an unjust attitude that disregards the right to life of nature and future generations, and it triggers the climate crisis and makes the people pay for all kinds of wrongdoing. We see the ecocide law proposal prepared by the citizens as the key to all legal processes and awareness-raising efforts that will benefit nature and society. Inviting all citizens to join us and follow us on social media, I remind you again that on November 28th, with 25,000 signatures, we will submit a citizens' ecocide law proposal to Parliament. This mobilization of ours, who made citizens the maker of the law for the first time in Turkey by the help of petitions, is indeed an unprecedented declaration of a democratic will, defending the rights of trees, fish, blackened rivers, and the future of our children, whose voices we may not hear, but who die every day. In these dark days the world is going through, I invite everyone who is not yet with us to be part of this hope-giving, change-triggering campaign. As it is often said, we can achieve the difficult, the impossible, only takes time. Yeah. Now I can get questions and translate them. Sorular varsa alalım.
You've been doing such amazing work here. It's so exciting.
Yeah, yes. And it's all been done by all these people. I know these people wearing their uniforms, not uniforms, maybe just saying ecocide crime and going out in strong winter breeze, and in the heat of summer, they were just defending and trying to reach at people. And these are the people. Actually, they will be watching you later on. That these are the guys who live in Istanbul, you know. So we have a network that covers not the whole Turkey, which was the main plan before the earthquake, but quite some extent we cover. All right. Do we have any questions? Anything and everything. Sorumuz var mı arkadaşlar? Aklınıza gelin soralım. Hı hı.
Ben Jojo'ya tekrar geldiğim için teşekkür ederim.
Thanking you. Being here.
Ülkemizde veya diğer Avrupa ülkelerinde ortak yaşanan çok sıkıntılı bir süreç var. Ve biz bunu ekokırım olarak tanımlandırmaya başladık. Benim merak ettiğim mevzu, biz bu ülkede sahalara çıktığımız zaman doğal yaşam döngüsünü, ekosistemi korumak için güvenlik güçleri tarafından oldukça sıkıntı yaşıyoruz, zorbalık görüyoruz ve müdahalelere maruz kalıp sık sık gözaltı süreçleri de yaşadığımız zamanlar oluyor. Avrupa ülkelerinde, İngiltere'de, yaşadığınız ülkede de bu tür sorunlar yaşıyor musunuz? Bunu merak ediyorum. Birinci sorum bu.
Okay, Henry. Well, when we're out, when we take things to the streets, we are being kind of confronted disproportionately by the by police, maybe sometimes gendarmerie comes over, and we are put into detention, right? So this is the case. We have to, yeah.
Translation is being done by Eren. Is it possible to listen the translations of contributions?
Duyabiliyor mu Eren?
Eren hears everything.
O zaman
And translate it into English, but
I can put
later, after this question, Ilksen.
Tamam.
You
You can
will
put your
this question first.
carry on.
Yeah, so the question is that do you have the same kind of obstacles that you encounter in England when you are to take action on the street for environment?
I'm just going to see whether I can get on the English. Okay. Yeah, I can. Yeah. Okay, it's kind of coming through double, but
Yeah, we're echoing all the way through. Thank you, dear assistant.
shall I try answering?
Okay,
that?
answer.
I can hear it coming back from the audience. Sorry.
Kulaklığı takılı ama Türkçe
Türkçe
geldi.
şimdi başladı.
Tamam. Geliyor ses geliyor. Jojo'nun sesini alıyoruz.
Okay.
So I just carry on. So yeah, in answer to your question, yes, and this is a phenomenon that is happening in many parts of the world, that climate and ecological defenders and protesters are being targeted by the police, and actually in many places criminalized. Okay, there's two things I want to say. One is when that starts happening, you know you're making a difference because you're seen as a threat. That's one thing. But also, it in itself, it also speaks to the importance of ecocide law in particular, because at the moment, I mean, and in some countries, it really is life-threatening to stand up and defend your territories, like, for example, in some of the South American countries, and where people get disappeared or killed if they're protesting. But the narrative around that is very much that these protesters are interrupting legitimate business activity, when in fact what we're trying, the whole point of what we're doing with ecocide law is to move that question mark from over the heads of the protesters to over the business activity. And as soon as that happens, as soon as, and even potentially before the law is in place, because the narrative is gaining traction, once that question mark sits in the right place over the potentially criminal activity, there is a complete 180-degree reframe of the protesters. They stop being the criminals interrupting legitimate activity and become the moral upholders of the law, because the question mark is now over the business practice. So it underlines precisely why this is important. there is also another element of this, because what this also highlights is why it is so important to apply criminal law, because as the human rights defenders rapporteur from the UN, so the special rapporteur on human rights defenders, recently said, of course, the reason governments are trying to criminalize protesters is because it's quick, cheap, and it's a really strong deterrent. And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, well, yeah, ecocide law, legislation, criminal legislation can be quick, cheap, and it has a massive deterrent effect. So it's precisely the same reason that we need to criminalize these activities. When you think of how much finance is being poured, or in some cases, just not enough of it being poured into climate mitigation, adaptation, all the different aspects and different sort of regulatory frameworks, but different kind of initiatives from government to government around addressing ecological crisis, you know, they're hugely expensive compared to a simple change in legislation that could have an absolutely profound effect. So I think one aspect as well that is really worth talking about to governments at the government level, this is cheap. It's cheap, and it's really, really effective in the sense that it will have people start thinking in a new way, instead of those expensive lawyers working out how to, you know, just approach the red line without crossing it, or potentially balancing off those compensations against the profits. You know, instead, when they're starting to think about how do I keep my bosses out of jail, they're going to start doing the right kind of due diligence. Because I'll give you an example. When we build a factory, we don't sit there and say, let's build this factory so that we almost break people's heads open all the time, but not quite. We don't do that. It's not safe. What we say is, how do we build this factory so that nobody breaks their head open? It's that kind of difference in approach that we're looking at being provided with the criminal law. Thank you. So the way that Stop Ecocide International approaches this is that we have kind of two main areas of work. One is at the diplomatic and political level, where a lot of that work is behind closed doors. So we invite, we do political briefings for political parties and government advisors and so on, or we convene meetings of many different state representatives at the same time. We do this, for example, at the UN General Assembly High Level Week in New York every year. And so that we try and keep everybody updated with what's happening in the different parts of the world. And on that level, what we're seeing is very interesting in the sense that, for example, at the International Criminal Court, there is quite a strong interest in this potential development. And that, every year at the Assembly of States Parties, we hold events there that kind of bring that community of states up to date, if you like. And we have now acquired a reputation for breaking records in terms of attendance of ICC third events. But what is also interesting is when we started this, we thought that national developments might distract from the international goal. And of course, we always aimed for the International Criminal Court because that's where the crimes that are considered most serious have to have the jurisdiction. And of course, because anyone ratifying a crime there usually will include it in their own domestic legislation. What we have actually found in practice is that the narrative at the international level has sparked a lot of domestic level development, like in Turkey, for example, but like in a number of other countries. And so, for example, what we do at that point is coordinate in the sense that we will provide examples of drafts that have happened in other countries, to help an increasing number of countries look at legislating. But we're also seeing that as those countries enter into the conversation, the discussions at the diplomatic level move forward as well, because they're seeing that the various individual nations are becoming interested in it. So what seems to be the case is that at that diplomatic political level, it's kind of mutually reinforcing, which is wonderful. We didn't expect that, but it has been the case. And then the other aspect that we work on, as you know, is the much broader civil society narrative. And how we manage that aspect is that we do a lot of connecting and networking and a lot of sort of briefing into different networks, because what we've understood, and I'm sure that anyone who has dealt with politicians knows this, or who is a politician knows this, they're very busy people. And they also don't like to be the first one in the party, to the party. They want to know that it's safe to talk about something. And what makes it safe is the knowledge that the conversation is happening in other governments and in other parliaments, but also within civil society. So what we do is we organically kind of cross-feed this narrative into as many sectors as we can. And that is probably the biggest ask that we always make of our audiences as well, is, when you can talk about ecocide, use the word, talk about it in your network, and cross-feed it through as many sectors and interest groups as possible. It sort of creates a kind of organic, very broad web where the concept is seeded into as many different areas as possible. And what we find is that collaborative approach makes a big difference to how fast the conversation moves. I'll give you a simple practical example. At big international conferences, we usually try to get events into the program or part of in the margins of the program, and we always collaborate with several other organizations to do that. Firstly, obviously, that gives this movement access to all of those audiences as well, but also that gives those organizations a platform as well. So we give them a platform to talk about what they want to talk about and link it to ecocide law. And I think one of the things that's quite interesting about and powerful about the ecocide law movement is that it is not in competition with any other environmental cause. So it's not an individual thing like save the koalas or stop microplastics, or people often have their own particular passion in the environmental area. But ecocide laws support all of them. I recently heard from one of our German team, actually, who told me that in ancient Rome, the famous politician Cato used to finish all of his speeches, no matter what the subject of his speech, he would finish all of his speeches with this phrase: "And I am also of the opinion that Carthage should be destroyed." And effectively, over time, it's a kind of, I realize that's a bit of a military example, but it's a kind of and situation. It's not a competition situation or an or, it's and. So yes, save the koalas and put ecocide law in place because that will help. Stop microplastic pollution, put ecocide law in place, that will help. And we also find that when we talk to influencers, celebrities or whatever, they often have their particular focus that they want, but they're often willing to say, and this is a really good idea because this will support what I'm doing. And then we can use that. So, I think there's a kind of breadth to the narrative in that way.
Actually, it has exactly emerged in this kind of way, because in the beginning we have started with Marmara only, and then it spread all around. No matter where the people are, no matter what they're doing, they just bought the idea because it fits into
their content.
To their content, and gives them a kind of concrete goal, so to speak, that they can do some difference tangibly.
Yeah.
Do we have? Time is up.
Oh, well, should we take one more? Yes, there is. There is a procedure for the amendment of the Rome Statute. It's one of the reasons that we aim specifically for that route, because there is an established amendment procedure that has been successfully used in the past, and it requires a state or a group of states to propose the amendment. Obviously, then you end up with a negotiation of text with the different states. And for adoption, you need at least two thirds of the member states. And at the moment, there are 123, which means you need 82 states to be in favour. It's worth bearing in mind that the International Criminal Court operates on the whole by consensus, but it will push things to a vote if it needs to. But what that means is that you usually see quite quickly who's for and who's against, because those who are not speaking are giving assent by their silence, if you see what I mean, that's quite an interesting context. It's not a tick box exercise. It's actually about having a core group of states that is willing to really move forward with it. And that is something at the diplomatic level that we are encouraging and helping to convene and facilitate as much as we can. Obviously, ultimately it's up to the states, but we can advise, we can brief, we can help as much as possible. And there is already an informal group of states engaged in this conversation.
No,
Okay.
Evet, bitti, tamam. Özetle 3'te 2'sinin kabul etmesi lazım. 123 tane ülke var. Bunlardan yapalım mı?
Eren çıkıyor, o da İngilizce biliyor zaten.
Okay,
So thank everybody.
so much. Thank you, everyone who just became patient with our technical issues. And Robin and Eren and everyone, Çiğdem in here, and everybody in here who are listening outside. Thank you for joining us. See you in our next event, in the event page.
And please continue to follow the work of Ecocide Türkiye and of course Stop Ecocide International, and continue to talk about ecocide.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.